So, imagine this. You are waiting for the next strip marketing in your favorite gacha game. The posts finally arrive. The drip marketing posts show a character. Their art is incredible. The model is updated and looks actually good. Everything is pointing towards a successful design of a character. Then we get an unexpected event. People are complaining. But people are not complaining about the design. They aren't complaining about the art or even the element of the upcoming character. They aren't even complaining about the potential power creep. Instead, a portion of the Chinese community start to ask a question that no one expected. Why is this character even playable? Welcome to one of the strangest debates that currently has the Neverness to Everness community in a chokehold. For once, we have a controversy not because of the element of the character, not because the redesign is not appreciated by many. Zankou is controversial because she is a villain. This is what got me thinking, why does this tend to happen with gacha games? This isn't the first time a morally questionable character has become playable, and it has somehow for the most part led to the division in the player base. A portion of the player base celebrates this, while the other portion starts pushing back on the unit. We have seen villain-type characters become playable multiple times before: Scaramouche, Phrolova, and even Nemesis in Tower of Fantasy. However, even when we look outside of gacha games, the debate of whether villains should become playable seems to always happen. Maybe Zankou is just our latest case study for a question that should actually be answered. Should villains be playable at all? As gacha games is a genre where you are effectively collecting characters you like, shockingly enough, players seem to care a lot about the morality of said character available for collection. Let's start by going over what actually happened. As we all know by now, Hota teases the upcoming units through a post. Every gacha game seems to do this by now. This has been dubbed drip marketing by the gacha community. We all know the hype that follows after an upcoming character is revealed. Players went over the changes in her design, her potential role in the game, and so on. The discussion was all too familiar, until things took a turn and shifted away from actual gameplay. The strange thing isn't that people dislike Zankou, it's that they are questioning whether villains should be playable at all. Some players started asking, why are we even able to pull and play her? Their reasoning, you wonder? Because Zankou isn't introduced to us as another useful ally. She is part of the Scarlet Letter. This is a group that currently opposes Zero in the story. She isn't an anti-hero or just a morally grey character, but a direct villain in the story. This was more than enough for many to ask, if she's an antagonist, why should she even become a playable character in our roster? Why should units that were affected by her actions in the story fight alongside such a character? Those questions and sentiments quickly spread across the community. This created a new discussion about the patch 1.3 and happened to be one of the prevailing discussions at that. Now, I want to make one thing clear. This is in no way the opinion of the whole Chinese community. In fact, it couldn't be anything further from that, as many players are quite excited about the idea of having Zankou as a playable character. Many actually prefer to have characters whose morality is somewhat muddied, as they believe it makes for a story with more depth. But this doesn't stop the discussion from becoming so large in the Chinese community that the global community has picked up on it as well. This is no surprise really, as this has happened time and time again. In fact, multiple times, which raises the bigger question. Why do playable villains make people so uncomfortable in the first place? One thing you'll always notice with the discourse around gaming communities, they are all constantly asking for developers to provide better stories. This includes characters that have more depth, are driven by complicated motivations, and we also ask for moral ambiguity. We enjoy a good story that isn't categorized so easily as black and white. This is all well and good until something strange happens. The moment one of these morally complicated characters become playable, a portion of the player base just seems to reject this idea. As if complexity is only okay if it stays in the story and is far from them. I mean, think about this clearly. Villains are always in the game and no one will ever complain. Sometimes they steal the show and are quite loved by the player base. Usually villains with charisma and charm, those you can never predict. Without them, the story wouldn't even progress. The main character wouldn't even learn and grow. Why is it then that the conversation tends to shift when we are allowed to pilot them and control them in the game? The moment you pull a villain, from that moment going forward, they are no longer just a character you are watching in a story. They become someone you are choosing. The morality feels much more personal. This is where I think the entire debate actually begins. If you've been playing gacha games for a while, this is probably all too familiar. Zankou is far from the first character to spark this discussion in players. Perhaps the most famous example being Scaramouche from Genshin Impact. Long before he became the Wanderer, Scaramouche was one of the game's big antagonists. He was literally the Balladeer, the sixth Fatui Harbinger. He manipulated and caused suffering for many people in the story throughout multiple arcs. He was in no way introduced as a character that is misunderstood. He was in fact a character that we were supposed to dislike. The irony in all this is that he became a popular character within the community. When he was eventually announced as a playable character, the all too familiar divide happened. The community was split and couldn't agree on whether he should be playable. The fans supported the decision and were happy, arguing that redemption is a compelling narrative to have. People can change and grow. That a story is much more meaningful if the villain isn't just someone we defeat and move on. Others weren't convinced at all. Redemption does not erase all the atrocities of the past. Notice something interesting here. The discussion quickly turns away from gameplay. It starts to become a question of morality. Not character design or potential playstyle, but values, and that distinction is important. Why, you wonder? The gameplay was never the question or the issue. The controversy has always been players not wanting the unit to represent their account. So, why does this keep happening? At this point, we have seen this debate happen multiple times. Scaramouche, Phrolova, and even La Signora. Even though she never made it into the playable roster, it didn't escape the discussion of why she should never become playable. Whenever a playable antagonist is teased or the idea arises, one side says, yes, we got a morally complicated character. The other replies, some characters should just stay villains. Should every compelling character eventually become collectible? Or does it actually make the story stronger to have some units that are permanently out of the reach of players? I feel like answering this question makes you realize that the debate is more than just a Hota made Zankou playable, but far more about players wanting to experience the story. I will just throw this out there. I actually think gacha games have an identity problem. One thing that sets gacha games apart from other genres is the relationship that the players develop with the units they pull. Think about any other RPG. You might even be playing as a morally questionable protagonist. Maybe you play as the villain at some point and do some terrible things. All this, however, does not make the players think twice about playing the game. There are no debates or anything, as you are just playing a role, and the story moves on. This is where I think gacha games differ. Your pooled characters will never leave your roster. You will pull for them, build them, and they're yours forever. You build affection by giving these units gifts, you unlock skins for them, hangout events, you can take them for a ride on your car and invite them to move into your house. All this to say, you are actually choosing the characters you pull. Psychologically, you feel like you own the character, and this makes it more personal, which is exactly the sort of relationship that developers want. A villain in a movie is fun to watch, sure. A villain you spend time to build and spend resources on then becomes a different story altogether. I feel like the people are rejecting villains because their choice has become personal, and the question becomes, do I want this unit to represent my account? It might sound dramatic to me and you, but to the next person, this is what I genuinely think is happening. We don't actually hate villains. This is where the discussion becomes even stronger. As if villains were truly hated, they wouldn't make up most of the popular characters in fiction. Think gaming, anime, and even movies. We have Sephiroth, Lelouch, Joker, Virgil, Darth Vader, Magneto. Really, the list goes on. So even outside gaming circles, people love villains. Not because we agree with their actions or anything like that, but because they happen to be the most interesting characters. Many memorable stories are often because of villains as opposed to the protagonists or heroes. So clearly the problem is not that we dislike antagonists. The real issue appears when developers ask us to stop observing villains and start to identify with them. This is why developers approach the whole playable villain shenanigans so carefully. It's actually quite the balancing act. On one side you have storytelling, complex villains, and redemption arcs. On the other side you have player perception. Developers must always be thinking to themselves, will making this unit playable make players think we are celebrating this character and their actions, or are we just simply exploring them? Online, you will see this discussion become somewhat oversimplified. People will claim China doesn't allow playable villains. Reality is, Chinese developers operate in a regulatory environment that encourages positive social values. This has led to the fortunate or unfortunate event where writers have to become more conservative in their morally conflicting characters. It is in no way forbidden. This is the reason I believe villains are usually softened up before becoming playable. This is why they get sympathetic backstories and personal tragedies are revealed. They are not rewriting the villains because players hate them or anything. They are rewriting villains because controversy is expensive. Potter is no stranger to playable villains. In fact, they are a studio that is not confined to simple good versus evil conflicts. If you've ever played Tower of Fantasy, you already have an idea of this. Throughout the game, the line between protagonists and antagonists is constantly moving. A perfect example of this being Nemesis, originally tied to the gentle Shirley. She was transformed through horrific experiments. Yes, she was being controlled, but she became the fifth angel of clemency. She was a literal killing machine. She served the antagonist group goals and turned against her former allies. Yet players could pull for her, play her, and all the good stuff. This wasn't accidental in any way. This tells us that Hota is comfortable with blurring the lines between villains and heroes. I personally think the strongest criticism against playable villains is not that they are made playable, but having them overused by developers can actually weaken storytelling. So, what's the solution, you ask? I personally do not think banning all villains from being playable is the answer, as not every antagonist deserves redemption. Not every villain should even survive. Some stories become a better and a stronger story because the villain remains exactly the same evil character we have come to know and love. La Signora is a perfect example of this. Whether you loved or hated the decision, her death had quite the strong impact in the story of Genshin Impact. Such deaths remind players that popularity does not guarantee survival, while at the same time, there is a lot of danger in playing it safe. Imagine a world where developers listened and ensured that every villain is never playable. Scarlet Letter would never be playable. Any future antagonist, never playable. Morally grey characters rewritten to become cheerful allies before they become playable. To me, that would defeat the storytelling, as the moment a villain appears, I would already know the answer. If they are to become playable, they'll probably become one of the good guys. If not, they are probably purely a villain forever. That would kill all the mystery and surprise for me. There would be no payoff at all. Life is complicated, and so are characters. Sometimes heroes make terrible decisions, and sometimes villains make a good point. Predictable stories create forgettable characters. Now, as I wrap this up, I don't want you to think that I mean every villain should automatically become playable. I think great stories don't make every villain redeemable. Great stories make us question if they deserved any sort of redemption in the first place. If every antagonist receives a tragic flashback and joins your team, players will stop believing in consequences and death will mean nothing. Every character doesn't need to become a hero. I just want them to be believable. Do you think villains should be playable in gacha games? Or are there characters that should remain the same way they are forever? Let me know down below. I read every single comment, and this is one discussion I genuinely think has no easy answer. If you enjoyed this video and like these longer form discussions about Neverness to Everness, consider subscribing because I've got plenty more essays on the way. Until the next time, I'll see you in Hether.